Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about writing reviews. Now, there's a couple of different approaches you can take to writing a review depending on what your purpose is. If this is something like a Yelp review for a restaurant or a service or something like this, there's probably different things that you want to focus on than if you're writing, say, a book review or a film review or something like this. So we're going to talk about each of these because they're slightly different, but they're definitely related. There's core elements that are at the heart of writing a review. And the biggest core element at the heart of writing a review is that this is evaluative, right? You are assessing the thing on whatever terms it is supposed to meet, right? So I've done a video about evaluation before. If you're assessing a pizza, you have to figure out what are the criteria that a good pizza should meet, right? And that may be somewhat subjective, right? Some people are going to like very thin, crispy crusts. Some people are going to like thicker, more bready crusts. Some people want a lot of sauce. Some people want a little bit of sauce. Some people want a lot of cheese. Some people want a little bit of cheese. You have to figure out what are the criteria for a good pizza, and then you assess from there. And you may need to justify those criteria in some instances. I mean, again, if you go to a Chicago deep dish pizza restaurant, order a Chicago-style deep dish pizza, and then you assess it on the criterion of does it have a thin, crispy crust, then you've probably applied a standard that's not really relevant, right? Because the nature of a deep dish pizza is that it isn't thin crust. And so that's one of the things you want to consider. Given what this particular pizza is supposed to be, whether this is wood-fire grilled, whether it's cheap and quick, whether it's deep dish, whether it's New York style, whatever it is it good for that type of pizza? The same thing applies for any other type of review. If you are reviewing a book, for instance, what type of book is this? Is this a scholarly monograph? Is this a mystery thriller? Is this a comedy? Whatever it is. What type of book is it? And what are the criteria that should be used to assess whether or not it is successful at the thing that it's trying to do? Now, how you approach that, this is where you start to get some differences in how different types of reviews might function. So we're going to think about this sort of in terms of informal reviews and formal reviews. And that's a slightly arbitrary distinction, but I think it's basically a useful one. So if you're thinking about informal reviews, you might be thinking about things like Yelp, Rotten Tomatoes, Goodreads, places like this, places where people are giving their own individual opinion. They're assessing a thing to greater or lesser degrees from their personal response. Formal reviews would be more critical, scholarly, better developed. They'll often be published reviews, whether that's published in something like the New York Review of Books, whether that's published in a scholarly journal, whether that's published wherever it is. Professional food critics, music critics, whatever it is. And so these will tend to be a bit more developed. They'll tend to be a bit more formally argumentative, whereas informal reviews may or may not be structured as an argument. So you take something like Goodreads, for instance. This is a really good example. People will post sometimes hundreds of reviews of books, and some of them will be really detailed and sort of explore the arguments made in the book or the points of craft and artistry and whatnot, whatever it is that's appropriate for that book. And some will be very surface level, some will be very vague. I really liked this book apart from X character who irritated me post. And that's fine for an informal review. That's fine. Totally okay. Because there are no particular standards that an informal review necessarily needs to meet. It can be entirely, this was my personal reaction to it. And I've written informal reviews like that. I've written informal reviews where a lot of it is, this is how I responded to this book for these reasons. Or how I responded to this movie. Or this was my personal take on this restaurant, whatever it is. Whatever type of thing you're informally reviewing. Again, Yelp, Rotten Tomatoes, Goodreads, these are examples of places where you see a lot of informal reviews. Often it will be, again, highly personalized. It may just be... It may be as simple as, I liked this, I didn't like this, often for X reason, but not necessarily. Sometimes it is just, this restaurant was good. Post. Whatever it is. So yeah, informal reviews. There's a wide range of what can be included. More developed informal reviews are often going to, again, still apply those evaluative criteria, but they may do it with greater or lesser degrees of argumentative structure, right? They may or may not have, say, a thesis statement or an overall... They'll often have an overall assessment, but they may or may not sort of develop points and provide evidence and stuff like that. And that's where you really get a distinction between informal reviews and formal reviews, because formal reviews will tend to have a central argument that they're making about this text. They will tend to support it with evidence. They will often be developed through paragraph structure, topic sentences, things like this, especially for things like book reviews, theater reviews, film reviews, stuff like this. You will, particularly scholarly ones, you will see formal reviews, published sort of professional reviews that are more personal, and you will see some that are less personal. Often for scholarly work, for scholarly book reviews, film reviews, theater reviews, things like that, we tend to be more distant from the review. We talk about what the text does in itself. We talk about the scholarly or artistic strategies of the thing that's being reviewed. But there are other contexts, often more sort of popular sources like New York Times Review of Books, London Review of Books? I can't remember exactly what the name of it is, but you know what I mean. These sort of more professional things, and tons and tons and tons of magazines, newspapers, journals, things like that, that publish reviews for popular consumption. Sometimes these will be more personal. Here is how I responded to it, sort of taking the self as a stand-in for a general audience. Not that there's any such thing in reality, but we often work from that assumption. What would a general audience think about this book, for instance? And so this is, I think, an interesting sort of distinction that exists primarily, I would say, within formal reviews, because informal reviews, again, are much more likely to be highly personalized. Formal reviews, there are definitely sort of distanced reviews, and often the reviews that I write for professional scholarly journals will be quite impersonal in that sense. You don't have a lot of first-person pronouns. I, me, my. Sometimes you will, but typically it's more focused on the thing itself, the thing being reviewed, and you talk about that in terms of what it's doing in its own right. And focus maybe on here's what this is trying to do for the audience. Here's what it's trying to do for the readers, for the viewers, whatever it is. But again, then you're sort of imagining an idealized general audience. And then again, there are more personalized ones that we'll talk about. Here was my response to this. This made me feel this way. I made these connections, whatever it is. And that's definitely a legitimate way of reviewing something as well. But again, ultimately, the key thing with writing a review, this whole process is based on evaluation, based on figuring out what are the criteria that this particular type of thing should meet, and how well has it met those criteria.